So here's a brutal truth that nobody wants to admit. 95% of the value proposition you're presenting to prospects are being completely ignored. Not because your solution is not good, but because you're talking about features when your buyer is thinking about outcomes and their future. I'm Sultan Semlali, and over the past 20 years selling in B2B, I've seen thousands of sales professionals struggle with the same problem. They know their product inside and out, but they can't connect it to what actually matters to their prospect. Today, I'm going to show you the exact framework I use to create value propositions that don't just get attention, they get signatures. The framework is called Vision, and it's not just another sales acronym. This is a systematic approach to understanding your prospect's world so deeply that your solution becomes the obvious choice. So here's what we're covering today. How to uncover your prospect's true strategic vision, not just what they say they want. The difference between symptoms and real issues that are costing them money. Why your solution is probably backwards. How to quantify impact in a way that creates urgency. The objection handling technique that actually builds trust. And the next step frameworks that turns momentum into movement. But here's what I need you to understand before we dive in. This is not about being more persuasive. This is not about being more convincing. It is about being more valuable. When you truly understand someone's business, selling becomes serving. So let's break this down and start with vision. The V in vision stands for vision. And this is where most salespeople get it completely wrong. They think vision means asking, what are your goals for this year? But that's not vision, that's a to-do list. Real vision is about understanding your prospect's aspirational future state. It's about where they see their organization in 3 to 5 years, how they want to be positioned in the market, and what success looks like when everything goes right. And here's a question that changes everything. If you could wave a magic wand and solve everything perfectly, what would success look like in 3 years? Notice what it does. It gets them thinking beyond their current constraints. It gets them talking about transformation, not just improvement. But here's the key. You're not just listening for what they want to achieve. You are listening for who cares about this vision in their organization. What's driving the urgency behind this vision? And how this vision connects to competitive pressures. Or what happens if they don't achieve this vision? When you understand their vision at this level, you're not selling a product anymore. You're positioning yourself as a strategic partner who understands where they're going and can help them get there. But here's what I've learned. Vision without understanding current reality is just wishful thinking. And that's where the first I comes in. So the first I in vision stands for issues. And this is where you separate yourself from every other salesperson who's walked through their door. Most salespeople ask about pain points and then jump straight to their solution. And that's really amateur hour. Professional sellers dig deeper. They understand the difference between symptoms and root causes. But here's what I mean. A prospect might say, we need to reduce cost. That's a symptom. The real issue might be that their current process is so inefficient that they are losing competitive deals because they can't respond fast enough to an RFP. So the question that unlocks this is, if these issues persist for another 12 months, what's at risk for your organization? This question does two things. First, it quantifies the cost of inaction. Second, it creates urgency. When someone realizes that doing nothing costs them more than your solution, the conversation completely changes. But here's the advanced move. You need to understand who feels these issues most acutely. Is it the CEO worried about market share? The CFO concerned about margin? The operations team drowning in manual processes? Because here's what I've learned about after so many years, is that people don't buy solutions to problems they don't personally feel. They buy solutions to problems that keep them up at night, even though I hate that sentence. When you can articulate their issues better than they can, when you can connect those issues to business impact, and when you can show them what happens if they don't act, that's when you earn the right to present your solution. And that solution better be good because now they're actually listening. So let's talk about solutions. The S in vision stands for solutions. And this is where most salespeople blow it. They present their solution like it's the only option in the universe. It's a wrong move. Because here's the counterintuitive truth. The best way to sell your solution is to accept that there are alternatives. When you do this, you build credibility and trust. When you don't, you sound like every other salesperson that wants to sell their product. And the way I structure this usually is to say something like, Based on everything we've discussed, I see 3 potential approaches. Let me walk you through each one and explain why I believe option 3 might be the best fit for a specific situation. And then you go through the options. Option 1 might be doing nothing, maintaining the status quo. You've already established the cost of this in the issues section. Option 2 might be an alternative approach or competitor. And you need to be honest about it, acknowledge where it might work and where it falls short for the specific context. And option 3 is your recommendation. But here's the key, you're not just presenting features, you're connecting every aspect of your solution back to their vision and the issues you've uncovered. And the magic phrase is, the reason I recommend this approach is because it directly addresses the issues we discussed, while positioning you to achieve your 3-year vision of market leadership, for example. But here's what separates good salespeople from great ones. You also need to address implementation. How will this work in their environment? What does success look like? What are the key milestones? When you can paint a clear picture of not just what you're recommending, but how it will work in their specific context, you're not selling anymore, you're consulting. But consulting without quantified impact is just expensive advice. And that's where the second I becomes critical. The second I in vision stands for impact. And this is where you move the conversation from what it does to what it delivers. And here's the mistake I see constantly. Salespeople talk about features and benefits, but they never quantify the actual business impact. They say things like, this will improve efficiency. Okay, but how much? What does that mean in dollar? What does that mean in hours? Competitive advantage? You need to do that translation. And professional sellers think in 3 categories of impact: financial, operational, and strategic. Financial impact is the easiest to measure, but often the hardest to calculate accurately. This is your ROI, your payback period, your cost savings. But here's the key. You need to use their numbers, not yours. And so the question is, based on the inefficiencies we identified, if you could reduce processing time by 40%, what would that mean for your team's capacity to take on new projects? Operational impact is about how work gets done. Faster processes, fewer errors, better quality, improved customer satisfaction. They often have financial implications, but they are felt immediately by the people doing the work. And last but not least, strategic impact. It's the big picture stuff. Market positioning, competitive advantage, capability building, risk mitigation. And this is what connects back to their vision. And an advanced technique you can use is to validate which type of impact matters most to each stakeholder. The CFO cares about the financial impact, the operational manager cares about operational impact, the CEO cares about strategic impact, etc. And so the question that ties it all together is, of all the outcomes we've discussed, the cost savings, the operational improvement, the strategic advantages, which would be most valuable to your organization right now? When they answer that question, you know exactly what to emphasize in your proposal. You know what matters most, and you know how to structure your business case. But even the best business cases fall apart if you haven't addressed the elephant in the room, their concerns and objections. The O in vision stands for objections and risks. And this is where a lot of salespeople either avoid the conversation entirely or handle it wrong. The average salesperson they will wait for the objections to come up and then try to overcome them. Professional sellers bring up the objections first. And you may ask why. Because when you acknowledge concerns before your prospect voices them, you demonstrate that you've thought this through. You show that you understand their world, and you build trust by being transparent about potential challenges. And here's where you can structure this. Now, I know you might be thinking you're probably concerned about 3 things: the investment required, the change management challenges, and whether this will actually work in your environment. So let me address each of those. If you notice what it does, it shows you understand their perspective. It demonstrates you've worked with similar organizations before. It gives you the opportunity to address concerns when you're in control of the conversation. But here's the key. You don't just acknowledge the objection, you provide a mitigation strategy. So for budget concerns, you could say, I understand the investment is significant, and this is why we typically recommend a phased approach that allows you to see results and build confidence before the full implementation. For change management, you could say, well, change is always challenging, and that's why our implementation includes comprehensive training and a dedicated success manager for the first 90 days. And for technical concern, you could say, Integration is critical. That's why we do a technical assessment upfront and provide a detailed integration plan before any work begins. And then the question that validates your approach is to say, what concern would your team have about this approach and how can we address those upfront? So when you handle objection this way, you're not selling against resistance, you're building confidence. You're showing that you're thinking about their success and not just your commission. And that confidence is what allows you to ask for the next step with authority. The N in vision stands for next steps. And this is where you turn momentum into movement. This is where deals either move forward or die in committee. Because a lot of salespeople end their presentation with something weak like, "So, what do you think?" Or, "Do you have any questions?" That's not a next step. That's an invitation for a delay. Professional sellers provide a clear roadmap from decision to value realization. They make it easy for the prospect to say yes by removing uncertainty about what happens next. And here's the way I structure this. So, based on everything we've discussed, here's what I recommend for the next steps. We have 3 phases: decision, implementation, and value realization. Phase 1 is decision. For the decision phase, I recommend we schedule a technical deep dive with your IT team next week, followed by a stakeholder alignment meeting with your executive team the following week. That would give us 2 weeks to address any remaining questions and get everyone aligned. It might scare them, but at the same time you set a clear roadmap to closing. Phase 2 is implementation. For implementation, we're looking at a 90-day timeline with 3 90-day milestones. Month 1 is setup and integration, month 2 is training and testing, month 3 is full deployment and optimization. And then phase 3 is value realization. For value realization, we'll measure success against the metric we discussed, the 40% efficiency improvement and the cost savings we calculated. We'll review this monthly for the first quarter to ensure we're hitting our targets. But here's the key. You need to get commitment on the next step before you leave the room. The question is, what would need to happen for you to move forward with confidence, and when can we schedule that next conversation? Notice what it does. It acknowledges that they might need additional steps, but it creates urgency around scheduling those steps. It gives the momentum going. So let me leave you with this. The vision framework is not about creating better value proposition. It's about becoming the kind of salesperson that prospects actually want to work with. When you start with their vision, understand their issues, present thoughtful solutions, quantify the impact, address objections proactively, and provide next steps, you're not just selling, you're consulting, you're adding value, and you're building relationships that last. If you want to see it in action, check out the next video where I'll be sharing an example of a value proposition built using the vision framework. I'll see you in the next one.